Okay, we'll start. I was waiting for a few people. They don't know how to reach our new home. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to all of you to our first event, Aga Khan Library event in our new permanent home, the Aga Khan Center. I'm so delighted to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Anne Regourd, and so thankful to her to accept this invitation. Dr. Anne Regourd, the Senior Research at the University of Copenhagen and Academic Director of the Program for the Protection of Manuscripts in the Private Libraries of Zabid, Yemen. Dr. Regourd also is the head of the peer-reviewed online journal Chronicle of Dr. Anne Regourd is a scholar with many skills, as all of us know, especially in the field of manuscripts, in Arabic textual studies, Islamic codicology, and manuscript cataloging. She had developed her interest in studying papers when she was working on the project for safeguarding the manuscripts of the private libraries of Zabid. After that, she started to use the paper as a source to write the history in papers. She also developed a systematic methodology for studying papers. Today's lecture, Dr. Anne will tell us about her exciting research journey in this field, and she will share with us the outcomes of her significant research. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, her recent publication, The Trade in Papers Marked with Non-Latin Characters, marks an important milestone in the field of Islamic manuscript in general and paper making in particular. And perhaps I brought the book with me. It belongs to the Aga Khan Library. It's not my personal copy. And I just wanted to quote something from the back of the book, of the cover. Saying the quote, opening the quote, primarily based on paper examination and quantitative data, the book invites us to treat papers as a source and provides tools to determine the production of manuscripts in space and time for the area of interest. This methodology offers new insights on the competition between suppliers to the various markets, particularly in respect of the emergence of import-export trading companies. End of quote. And before I hand over to Dr. Anne, I just wanted to say a few words about the Aga Khan Library. For those of you who don't know the Aga Khan Library, it's a production of the successful merger between the Library of Institute of Ismaili Studies, 40 years old, and the Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilization, Aga Khan University, 16 years old. And it comprises almost 50,000 volumes in subjects related to Muslim civilizations and Islamic studies in general, Ismaili studies in particular, and more subjects. And please, if you're interested in visiting the library or having a quick tour after the event, speak to my colleagues Shah Hussein and Wasim here on my left, or myself. Contact us, and you're very welcome to visit the library. Without any further ado, thank you very much, Dr. Anne, for accepting the invitation, and please join me welcoming Dr. Anne.
I have the pleasure to be here to present the book, The Trade in Paper Marked with Non-Latin Characters. It came out the 2nd of August, and I would like to thank the organizer, especially Walid, very warmly for giving me this very first opportunity to make a presentation about. For this presentation, I will concentrate on the purposes of the book. It is a collective book made up of 9 contributions by 7 contributors. It's maybe a bit blurred, but you will see the details of the presentation later. These cover a large area. The places where the manuscripts under study were produced include Africa and various parts of the Arabian Peninsula, India, the Middle East, and Iran. All the papers described by the contributors were imported. The first mentions we have of papers marked with non-Latin characters in scholarly studies, such as observations on Abu Shubak example. This is so the most well-known piece of Abu Shubak paper. As observations on Abu Shubak examples in Yemen made by Geneviève Imbert in 19. On Ali Kourna paper and mentions by Adam Gatchek to Beniamino Arbib and Abu Shubak papers in his book Arabic Manuscripts, a vademecum for readers, published in 2009, page 131, and on dry sealed papers, brought us immediately to types of paper which were produced recently, that is to say, in the 19th and 20th century. Some of them are machine-made papers. Then is of production, given the fact that the industrial production of paper has been able to change the situation. Indeed, since the middle of the 14th century, the Arab Islamic and then the African worlds have been importing watermark paper, both for the administration and for the production of religious, scientific, and literary codices, to the point that European paper is gradually becoming dominant during the 16th or 17th century from an area to another. Ottoman Turkey is a good example of these attempts at local paper production in response to imports before and during the industrial paper era. The papers studied in the book, those whose place of production are identified, Italy, UK, Belgium, and Russia. Thus, the origin of the papers used in Islamic manuscripts are involved even bigger when we take into account their place of production. Inevitably, paper studies bring us to global history. Paper is a traded item. More than a good, it is a commodity. And it is merely an interesting commodity, consumable but not eatable, and kept safely as long as possible, especially when it comes to be the media of canonical texts. Paper as a primary historical source of trade, making literary codex documents, is of particular data where transmission is mainly oral, but also when it comes going beyond the coasts to the interior. Not all of the paper was used in the country in which it first arrived. When our period begins, the onward trade continued by camel or coastal shipping. Therefore, the delineation of trade and trade routes are a central focus of the project proposed and initiated in this book. The production of manuscripts took place where there were scholars, and at least in Africa as well as in the Middle East or the Arabian Peninsula, it is far from being a phenomenon typical of big cities or even exclusively of townspeople. It is also known that individuals could carry bundles of paper in their travels as pilgrims in the Middle Ages, that cabotage boats penetrated Africa's rivers in the 20th century, and that 20th century Ethiopia had a network of suppliers in the provinces. Hence, the idea that paper, while object of commerce, could be a refined and exceptional marker, and that through the reconstruction of the routes papers took to reach their users would permit a mapping of trade. The book provides a synthetic map covering the main places for its production and uses collected in the contribution, as you can see from the screen. This book, therefore, has a methodological dimension. Terence Waltz opened the way in his seminal article, The Paper Trade of Egypt and the Sudan in the 18th and 19th centuries, published in 1985 in a collective volume edited by Martin William Daly, called Modernization in the Sudan, by relying on the items that he had collected mainly in the archives of Cairo. However, this was only done for the purpose of a study in the frame of a book devoted to Sudan history, and Waltz did not elaborate theoretically in order to make of his work a generic method which could be systematically used in new applications. Our methodology consists in taking the papers themselves at destination as our principal primary source of data. The first positive outcome is the establishment of the first authoritative list of the papers that were used where manuscripts were produced. It is anticipated that this inquiry generate an enormous volume of documentary evidence and hopefully evidence of new and previously unknown papers. The examination of these papers allow us to identify their dates and places of fabrication, as well as their producers, starting from the specifications of papers at destination. We expect to be able to identify at once their place of origin and additionally the places of the dates of copying of the manuscripts correlated with the kind of paper used provides us with statistical information on the period of use of a specific kind of paper in a particular and eventually with dates to reconstruct the history of trade. As a chronic comparison between the collections in different countries provide us with an accurate idea of the extant products in each area and allow us to begin establishing the pathways by which they arrived. In order to determine the final destination of the papers as commodity, we locate the exact place where the copyists used the paper to make manuscripts. Since many codices were circulating, sold, donated, smuggled, etc., and were bought in cities famous for the copying of manuscripts, for example, Mecca, the place where a manuscript is found does not necessarily reflect the place where it was copied. Our methodology is mainly based on paper identification rather than collecting data on the place of its fabrication on paper trade. Secondary source samples of papers at destination are gathered, and the examination and specifications of the paper itself give us indications of its origin. Statements concerning the final destination of the paper produced at a time, that is to say for us the time and place of the copy of the manuscripts, is obtained at the first stage through the include help to definitely establish the information given by the colophons. During this operation, of styles and and they are professional scribes have to be taken into account. Imitations, transfers are meant here, sometimes fakes, which can mislead us as to place time of the production. This new information, once compiled, is the premise of a documentary database. A selection of handwritten texts with a date in their colophon provide us with a statistical tool to determine the time, place, allow us, conversely, to suggest a date and a place of copy for the manuscripts. More than 50% and much more, depending from the region, which information. Papers are already seen as evidence for dating manuscripts in Arabic. However, with evidence of their use and place, they become a crucial feature that is more accurate than any others for the period studied. Paper identification is finally established through comparison with the documentation at our disposal. Catalogues of watermarks, first of all, catalogues of Islamic manuscripts recently published, articles or monographs. This methodology is definitely based on quantitative data. Evin Kropf has strengthened her corpus of papers by identifying a family of late 19th century Samaritan copists as their users. Olga Yastrebova has also extended our knowledge through her work on a corpus of diplomatic documents, the paper of which was produced in Russia and was used by Persia in exchanges with their Russian enemies during the Caucasian War in 84 and from 84 to 1813. And this is the same for the paper used by the of foreign affairs in Tunis in the 20th century, studied by Michael Bidel, for which we can infer from few samples to a special production reserved for the use of the administration. The duration of its use is implicit, believed to be extensive to the duration of the mandate of the head of the finance, although not absolutely precise. Developing an epistemological and methodological dimension is a signature of the series Documents and History, the first volume of which was published in 2013. Devoted to the Islamic papyrology from the beginning of Islam to the 16th century, according to a classical definition of the document as ranging from private or merchant correspondence to official, administrative, legal texts and others, this first volume of the series proposes to take into account the material or physical elements of documents, not only to specify them, but to characterize the provision of positive, non-subordinated or full data about these material elements. If this approach is employed in disciplines like archaeology and epigraphy, papyrology has increasingly based its analysis on the text while failing to systematically profit from the material data. Volume 3 of the series will be on the fake, the replica and the copy, Islam 7th, 20th century, which is the publication of the proceedings of a workshop held in Paris in 2013, but this will be I suppose, the next time. Within our region, in the 19th and the 20th century, papers were made locally from plants in India from an early period of the 19th century. The proposed study of in the Antemoro kingdom in Malagasy. The proposed study of the history of the papers used for the writing of manuscripts aims to cover the significant changes that occurred throughout the 19th, 20th century. This is that at the turn of the century, with the Industrial Revolution transforming manufacturing and transportation, new suppliers began to compete for custom around the rim and the Indian. The reorganization was therefore rooted in the regional imperialist struggles for dominance in the Red Sea area and the northwestern Indian Ocean, in Africa as well. But the paper market also benefited from improvements in production technique at all levels. To comment on the reasons why, I especially selected papers of Islamic manuscripts marked with non-Latin characters. The book shows in many places how the New Deal in the production and distribution of the 17th century transformed the pattern of paper supply in particular and trade in general throughout the Indian Ocean, in the Red Sea area, and in Africa. Paper is a unique basis for such investigation as it enjoys successful commodity and then used and consumed, becoming the material bearer of valuable information in the various languages of manufacturers, traders, scribes, and scholars, and even for organizing trade. From then on, the various languages of the papers whose places of production are known point not only towards their zone of production, but also towards their zone and circuit of these languages is obviously a commercial argument. The countermarks Alikurna came across before, and Abu Shubak follow a vernacular used in Ottoman and Arabian Peninsula with a probable extension to Red Sea markets. As shown by Evin Croft, the denomination Alikurna is attested as early as the 17th century, and as shown by Jean-Just Wittkamp, the vernacular Abu Shubak is attested in 1886 concerning a paper from Andrea Pordenone with a countermark entirely in Latin. Countermark, at least in Abu Shubak, so you can see this Andrea Galvani, which is under the written part of the folio, and Pordenone on the bottom of the image. So the countermark Abu Shubak in Arabic, at least in Abu Shubak paper of type C, so this is or type C of Abu Shubak paper, uses the language of the country of consumption. A well-known proverbial sentence in Yoruba language expressed in Ajami Hausa is described by Michael Biddle in her first contribution to the book. This is the one. Abu Shubak, meaning the man in the window, refers directly to the contribution, to the watermark of the crescent moon and face in a shield. Okay. it is worth keeping it, but of types of watermarks among the Indian papers, which are enormous, hit the sheet, and which raise the question of the taste of the sponsors or the perception of consumers' tastes. So I don't know how if you can see a bit. So this image and the star, yeah, star, and fixing. So this is some piece of sheet. So you have seen first the upper part, then this is the lower part, and then you will see so the right side of the sheet, of which I could get a. And here you can see there are two angels with a star, and and again the name of the producer, in fact the reseller. Okay. So this they are enormous. I've tried this. This is a much better of kind, but without a mark in non-Latin characters. I think I selected another one where you can see a ship on the top, and in fact, see, this is on because here this is the upper part of the sheet. Sorry. So so it's. Francis Richard stresses the taste for colored papers in blue and green in the Middle East and Iran, a taste that Russian producers did not fail to note. And it is still illustrated by the case of some dry stamp papers marked in Cyrillic, exported to 1850 and 1880, which were blue and green. Here as done by Francis for the book. No any example of blue and green, but dry seal with Cyrillic character taken from his paper. These industrial papers exported from Russia these industrial papers exported from Russia to Iran and used throughout the country imperceptibly supplanted local papers from the end of the 19th century. Among these consumers, it is necessary to count the scribes. Paper forms part of the instruments of work. We are thinking here to the family of Samaritan scribes introduced by Evin Croft. I mean by that they can have their favorite and loved paper. That there has been an adaptation of paper brands to the market, in particular borrowing watermarks or inspired watermarks, so ad hoc, had already been suggested about the papers Trelune, of which the oldest occurrence is 1597, sold to the Ottoman administration, but this remained often hypothetical. Our paper marks provide a striking proof. Behind the countermark Alikona or Abu Shubak of type D, can be divined in producers, Italian in this case. But the story of papers remains opaque and leads to the question of competition with papers exported from elsewhere. In the pot of reflection comes the question of the industrialization of paper production. From the 17th century, one of the largest Italian exporters of paper to the Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula and Africa, was the Galvanic Company, whose mills are located in Friuli. They were, however, a late adopter of industrial paper-making machines in the 19th century. The generation of their industrial paper in the week, like in our type D, Abu Shubak. In the first half of the 20th century, Yemen and Ethiopia, exactly in Harar district for Ethiopia, we have also some samples of the late Galvani papers made in the shape of which has a single and no more a double ring. The company was not doing well already in the 19th century. On the most well-known kind of Abu Shubak papers, there is the name Istanbuli, that we have maybe we have seen earlier. It's at the end of the first line. For which this book may offer a new hypothesis if we consider Istanbuli as the place of the reseller. The period from the 19th to the 20th century saw a reorganization of the trade around companies having access to paper distribution networks and in contact with the consumers. These commercial structures are transnational and can be registered in Europe. It is the case of companies operating in Africa with branches in the Middle East, or of companies operating in the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, particularly in Aden and Addis and inland, in late 19th, early 20th century. This is a phenomenon that is highlighted by Latin. The text of the countermarks slips imperceptibly from the name of the producer of the mill to that of the seller, who is also the sponsor of the paper. So, of course, this is a good example. And I have selected a couple of papers which are Bombay and English trademark, English made in England and Bombay. Abroad, the producer's mark gives way to the non-Latin countermark that are an indication of the sellers. On the same papers, Bombay stands beside Made in England or in Belgium. In India, the activity of these sellers or resellers is developing alongside a local artisanal handmade paper economy, which produces both vegetable papers and mixed papers, rags, vegetables, and recycled products. But the Indian papers explored in this book, which are machine-made, indicate about which we would like to learn more. Still used source of Bombay can be found in Yemen and in Ethiopia. In Yemen, the papers Bombay English made, which was found in a codex copied in 1916 in Zabid, is probably a residue of the English administration from its time in Aden from 1839 to 1968. Aden was administered by the English through India until 1937. Not one or two, but many names that appear in counter marks, and all knowledge of them remains far from complete. Beyond their variety, some share the suffix boy, like here, which suggests Israeli names. Representatives of this on the spot seem well connected to the authorities, for they have supplied paper to the administration. This is not all, for this type of paper is also found in manuscripts of Chronique du Manuscrit au Yemen, from mountain to mountain, exchange between Yemen and Ethiopia, medieval to and this is the working lives of individual Bahra traders whose career develops and whose promotion takes them through a position of regional responsibility, one of them from Bombay to Aden, then sent to Ethiopia. It is known that at the time English companies produced paper with or could design as requested by the customer. This reflection on the importance of papers marked with non-Latin characters began in 2011, then materialized in 2012 with this book project and a call for contribution launched in 2013. It is therefore a long adventure that culminates in this book, but the research is at its beginnings. There is much that remains unknown, even in the cases that have been studied. There are the unexpected work, the surprise presented by the chapter of the Muzafarid Quran from the Khalili and V&A collection, discovered by Alice. For the moment, it's exceptional, but it suddenly opens an abyss by taking the existence of non-Latin type marked papers back to the 14th century and encourages exploration of earlier periods in targeted area. There are issues that raise research questions or involve further research, and Sudan is a country absolutely in need of exploration. We are talking about India on the way too. We hope that the approach of primary source for the history of commerce demonstrates in an even more striking way the crucial importance of the conservation of unwritten originals. Papers can be and were digitized, but in the context of digitization devoted to the text maybe here. The papers remain the forgotten object of the campaigns of digitizations of manuscripts. So far, papers have been digitized more by paper specialists than by catalogers or curators. Beyond digitization, research with its meanders and new developments involves access to the originals. This book is a strong argument for such an approach.
I'd like to thank you, Anne, for this fascinating journey and presentation. And I think it's very nice to know trademarks before Polo and Adidas. So this is very obvious trademark in the Islamic manuscripts field as well. So now we'll open the floor for questions. We have almost 10 to 15 minutes, and please make your question short. Okay, Russell, please.
Thank you very much for the talk. In looking at the origins of paper and the trade across, let's say, the Mediterranean, I'm going to ask you a question which shows my ignorance. But as the Geniza documents from Cairo were not just written in Egypt, but were pieces of documents that came from all across the Mediterranean and further afield to Yemen, can we look at the Geniza documents and see anything in the history of the paper trade?
I have started, I have to say I've started because I'm working on the DKG collection, so David Kaufman Geniza collection in Budapest. And I'm, of course, because I'm a paper obsessed, I had a look at the paper. But so it depends from the time, of course, but we have obviously local production, and so it's extremely difficult to notably marks, so lines, and often very bad quality paper.
I could in books and manuscripts would be a very good quality. This notes probably.
Generally speaking, this is my impression. We have exception because, in fact, it's not easy to when you produce a codex. You want a size, so a dimension for your, so you have pieces of paper which are left over, and I think I found an example of reused pieces, so reused paper. Beginning of the Ottoman period in Egypt. So in this case, it could be good paper, and yes, but this I can elaborate on your remark on the quality of paper, because one of the hypotheses to understand the Jalali mark, which is extraordinary. It's incredible that Alice, one of the, so it could be, of course, everybody thinks about it, and also the Jalal is a name of God, but also another hypothesis is of good quality. Yeah, and I think the fact that in the Indian, so-called Indian papers, it is written made in England, etc., it's to show that it is a good quality paper of Belgium.
Can I ask you a slightly trivial question, but in the pre-colonial period in West Africa, Mecca, much of the cloth was wrapped in paper and the producer's name was written on it. Similarly, of course, there's a great deal of charms and other things. And I wondered if, in fact, this was part of the study that you're doing. And have you come across any wrapping paper, which isn't by definition always bad paper?
Yeah, you mean wrapping paper? So paper used to wrap cloth in it, or yes?
And write the name of the producer of the cloth, that if it was turned out to be bad cloth, you could return it to the producer.
I have
So it wasn't bad cloth.
No, I have only personally, maybe somebody in the floor can have an idea. But I have only seen an example in the Leinwand collection in Vienna of an old piece of textile which was collected in Egypt, 19th century. And it seems it bears not exactly a piece of paper, but a stamp to say that this cloth was produced in the royal workshop of the caliphal workshop, the caliph workshop. Yes. So this is afterwards. I have found I am working on pieces of paper, but not outside the cloth, but inside the cloth, which were reused paper, reused documents reused by tailors to yes. Yes, yes, amulets, but well, yeah, but is much more in skin, so skin.
Or textile.
African.
Is whether students wrote notes on paper, or did they simply use wooden boards for doing it?
No, they also used papyri and a very interesting, very strong example of papyri used by students has been described already. I have to find out the name of mind. But it could prove that it's like a palimpsest. You have layers of text, and it was washed to be reused. So this is an interesting old example.
That's fascinating, really amazing. Countermarks in Arabic script were obviously produced in response to a market demand. But for example, the Italian papers, the Prelude, Andrea Galboni, is very widely used in Southeast Asia for Islamic manuscripts in Latin. So I suppose, my question is, do you have any example of secondary sources documenting the correspondence or the contact with the European paper makers, which explained or cast some light on the mechanics of how these countermarks were introduced and for which centres and when?
So you mean when the countermark appeared as?
Do you have any evidence in the documentary other than the primary itself.
Right.
Any references to why?
Yes.
When?
Okay, I now I understand much more the question. In fact, thank you for asking, because secondary sources, as in many cases, so the information is scattered, and so to find it, it's a huge archives of fabric, and also monographies on producer or mills, etc. So it shows the importance of this material, because now we can also reorient our research and look for some types of information. Of course, the idea of the countermark is it's born in Italy. This is a well-known thing, and for that we have the Italian taxes, on which we can rely, and then for the interesting case raised by Evin and the Abu Shubak paper. What is interesting is that there is a vernacular used in the market, which was caught by the producer, who cleverly used them in their paper, so marked their paper with them. And so secondary source, Evin could find out that this vernacular existed since as early as the 17th century.
That's market-driven.
But the evidence of the Likurna in very much as far as our corpus can tell us. As for the Abu Shubak paper, this is we could say a primary secondary source, because this is this is the main point of Professor Wittkamp's paper in the book, because he found a letter in the correspondence of Slouk Uronieux, pronounce this correctly, tried, and Slouk obliged to leave Saudi Arabia very quickly, and had not the time to order the copy of 2 manuscripts he wanted. So he kept his contacts with Van der Scheijs, the vice consul of the Netherlands in Jeddah, and through him requested the copy of the. So in a letter, it is said that so the scribe will have to use a good quality paper and an Abu Shubak paper. And because in the library of Leiden they kept the 2 manuscripts, so they have the complete story, we could put in front so the primary source of the paper and the letter, which is a sort of primary secondary source. And this is how we could clarify what means Abu Shubak, because I decided not to go through all the historiography of the subject, and but since the 90s, we are struggling about the word Abu Shubak. What does it mean? And even in if you read, so the counterpart of the most famous type of Abu Shubak, you see Bayad, Abu Shubak, Istanbuli. So for an Arabist, this is very strange. Say there is a mistake there. And in fact, this is because it is a badal. So hopefully I...
Thank you very much for your talk. I really appreciate your approach to study these manuscripts, which is coming from the culture. But also, I have a question about the source of the paper. That's the other one is the functionality, which the writing tools and to the language. To what extent they determine where they bring these paper from? Let's say, for example, if you are writing Arabic, was it easier to write on a paper coming from India or from Europe? And also, do we have an example, especially when you were speaking about Abu Shubak, do we have example about paper which has Abu Shubak marker made probably in two different locations?
Again, the last question?
The last question is that do we have papers that has the watermark Abu Shubak, but they are coming from two different sources, two different cities, which must suggest that Abu Shubak was a kind of workshop, the same like when we study Sa'ad or the hand pottery in the Fatimid era in Egypt.
I will try to reply to your first question as quick as I can in saying that I'm working on, obviously, on papers in Ethiopian codices, and what struck me is that while Christian used parchment, homely produced, Muslim used paper for their manuscript. As far as we can tell, for sure in the 17th century onwards, and we have only very few examples from the 16th century. If you found something earlier, I'm interested to see. And even there are 3 and 2 produced outside of Tunisia. This is interesting because it is imported paper and locally made parchment. And so it means there are many things, go for, or push people to go for paper. Not only the price and the quality, so the machine-made paper are poor quality paper, and you see the problem I had to picture them. And so your second question about, thank you for asking, because in fact, apart from the type D, so where you have Waraq Abu Shubak and Andrea Galvani Pordenone, I do not know from where the other could come. And before we, thanks to this book, realized that there is this change with the reseller, which introduced their name in the paper. So the hypothesis was made that it was a Turkish Ottoman production. But then it was a nightmare because where, when, because we know that the Turkish Ottoman production went up and down. So, what I could say, so from the book you will see that I could make a real statistic. I have 3 pages of statistics. And I can say at the moment is that the delivery of Abu Shubak paper done in a different, followed a different route than the delivery of this paper in Yemen and in Ethiopia. But as Sudan is understudied for the paper, so I with example and maybe with mistakes.
Chinese connection at all?
Chinese connection.
From the earliest times?
No, 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 and no, 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 even if even for the pulp, no, not all.
We'll take the very last question and then we can carry on a discussion and reception just the next room. Jorge, make it very short, please.
Yeah, very short, yeah.
I'm not too long, maybe.
Dr. Anne, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. My question is about local use of local and imported materials for paper making in Egypt. I'm not an expert in this area. Could you shed light on papyrus, use of papyrus when paper mills were already technologies was already there? So what was the dependence on papyrus once that technology came to Egypt?
It was big, but in fact, what allowed us to say that during the 4th, 10th century, so papyri was no more the first media, is because paper became the first media in the administration. Because in reality, we have some statistics and we can see that still papyri were used to write codices or write probably documents. And until the 10th century, at least until the 10th century. So.
Okay, I think this brings our discussion to the end, and thank you very much, Anne, for your time and accepting the invitation. Thank you all for coming to this event, and please feel free to have coffee, tea, and next room, and maybe carry on the discussion. Thank you very much.
And I thank you very much for the